Welcome to another installment of Iron Horses. I'm Peter Pendergast. Seated directly across from me is our friend and host, Mr. Johnny Sprockets.
What's up,
Johnny?
Petey? How you doing?
Good. It's good to see you. You know, a lot has happened since our last program. Some of you have written in and said that you've seen Johnny on the local racing circuit. We'd like to confirm for our viewers that Johnny is, in fact, racing. Is that true?
Yep, and it's quite an adventure, really. We remember on show number 9, we took some old bikes that we found out in the rain, and we saved them from the rain, and we took them out and we put them back to what they were meant to do. We took them racing, and we did some ice racing in the winter, and now we're trying to do some hill climbing, and we're finding out that it's a big, big world of racing out there.
Now, how did you get into this, this racing? Because it just started for you last January.
Yeah, that's a good story. There's a friend of mine, and I'll call him my mentor. He's a guy named Henry Todd Kramer, and I met him in Worcester. I met him at a biker party, and he had a Triumph parked outside with no kickstand on it and oil leaks all over it. And I said, you know, gee, what are you doing with no kickstand? And he said, well, I'm a hill climber. I hill climb this bike, and I want to ice race it. And we talked a little further, and he asked me to be his partner on this ice racing project. So we started to work. He had a little shop in Millbury, Mass.
I know it's a 68 Bonneville. Is that what it is?
No, that I believe was a 65 Triumph 650 hardtail, 1965, which is as old as I am. And the thing was really awesome, and it went really good. And actually, we didn't win, but we showed. You know, we placed. And
now, I know you got a third place trophy.
Third place trophy in the ice race with the side hack. And a side hack is a little sidecar that you build out of common household scrap.
Now let's backtrack a little bit. This bike was not set to go ice racing. There were a lot of modifications which needed to be performed to the bike before it could hit the ice.
Right, right.
Tell us a little bit about that, because there was a lot of work that went in, a lot of after-hours work that went into that.
Yeah, well, we worked on it every night for a month until the wee hours of the night. And
so you would come home from work at what, 6 o'clock, and then you would hit the shop in Millbury, and you'd work till when? Till when? Till 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock?
No. Todd had a shop in Millbury, Mass, and we would go there directly from work. We wouldn't go home, you know, so we'd get there at like 5, and you stayed there till 2 o'clock in the morning every night for a month, sometimes a little longer than that.
That's crazy. That's dedication, man.
That's why, that's why a lot of racers are single, because
what type of things did you do to the bike? I mean, having it in the shop.
Well,
what needed to be done? Because I don't know.
Yeah, well, the bike was pretty much set. Todd had this bike running pretty good, and this bike was nothing really to look at. It was a few $100 motorcycle. This has got to be the lowest budget racing you can ever get into. It was a $600 or $700 motorcycle. We got $25 worth of stock from the Home Depot, a $15 wheelbarrow wheel, and we built a little sidecar on the side of it, built it from scratch, and with under $200 worth of investment. And it's got to be the cheapest and the best way to go racing.
The tires have, what, studs in them of some type?
Ice racing, that was the #1 expense, was the tires. Ice racing, people say, how can you race on ice? Ice on a frozen pond, and there's steel spikes that are put into the tires, and it took 30 hours of time to build one tire.
Jeez.
And so you got 2 tires, so there's 60 hours of labor just to get the tires ready. But in ice racing, the tires are the most important thing.
And you used electric conduit tubing to make the sled, or the sidecar.
Right, it's a sidecar, but it's not like an over-the-road sidecar like some of the BMW bikes you'd see. It was actually detachable from the bike too, and that was part of the beauty of it. You could bolt this thing onto the bike, take it outside, hack it, unbolt it, and take this bike down the road. And the side hack was made from electrical tubing, electrical conduit, which is very inexpensive, and it's very light. And the way we built it, we welded it together, and we made it sort of like a NASCAR race car tubing, and it was very, very strong. People were very skeptical. They said, electrical tubing is not strong enough. Oh, it's not going to hold the weight.
I was one of those skeptics, because I remember we were there in January watching you put this thing together, and I thought you were crazy, but it held up.
Well,
and you did it.
Me and this guy aren't no lightweights either.
No.
And the two of us and this machine combined is a pretty heavy package. And the electrical tubing sidecar held together.
Yeah. How much money to do an ice race?
Very low budget, under $500.
That's remarkable. I thought it would be $2,000-3,000, because you know when you go vintage racing up in Loudon or up in New Hampshire, it's a few grand.
Any kind of road racing or anything like that, they spend thousands and thousands of dollars to get these bikes prepared. The lowest budget racing ever that you can get involved with is this ice racing, and it's really, really a lot of fun.
Was it scary being on the ice? A lot of sliding around out there?
Yeah, it was sideways all the way. You were completely sideways.
Fierce competition?
Very fierce competition. We actually won a third place. We eked the third place out by a wheel. Against a guy who was right on our tail.
There was controversy, though, wasn't there? The guy said that he won.
Yes,
and
the scoring. There was a controversial scoring discrepancy because we had passed back and forth 3 or 4 times. He would wash out in the turn, and I would get under him, and then I would wash out in the turn, and he'd get under me. And I'll tell you, it was great.
Now,
fierce competition.
Now, Todd, sadly, has relocated to Colorado. I miss him. Great guy. I had a chance to hang out with him a bit before he left. So he's out of the picture. The bike's gone.
Right,
You've got a BSA that you put together.
Right. Well, we called it the Black Plague Racing Team, which was
okay. All right. So he's heading up the Black Plague Racing Team out in Colorado.
That's
and you're
correct.
Still
and we are still here.
Okay.
And our bikes are black. And if you see him, he's number 745, and I'm number 645. And it's too bad. Todd moved away to Colorado. He packed up his machine shop and all of his goodies, and he had a number of bikes. He was a Triumph expert. He was a Harley expert. He chose to race Triumphs because they were cool. And
no one else races them, really.
No, and we did really well.
That's beautiful.
And he was quite a genius, actually. He was a genius.
He's a good guy, and I miss him.
Yep, he was a metallurgist. He was a mechanic. He was a mad scientist. And he was great.
Yeah.
He had this bike. It was a street-legal bike that he rode every day. He hill climbed this bike up the hills of Munson, Mass, and all these other hill climbing events, which is an AMA-sponsored thing where you go up the hill and fall over backwards.
Exactly. Yeah.
And also, it was an ice racer at the time. So he got more bang for the buck out of this $700 Triumph than you could imagine.
But let's talk a little bit about this, the BSA that you put together. I know that you're now
solo.
You're solo, and you've had a couple excursions doing the hill climb with the BSA. Tell us a little bit about that.
You guys might have seen the BSA on Iron Horses number 9. It was in my living room there, and it was an old rat BSA that was out in the rain. We rescued it from the rain, and we put it together and made a lot of changes to that. And actually, in Todd's memory, we went hill climbing. We thought, geez, well, he can do it.
Let's try it.
I can do it.
Yeah.
And I'm finding out that I'm wrong. I can't do it like he did it. And he was quite a mentor, and I do miss him because I'm sure we would do significantly better if he was, helping us still.
You know, when I went to go and see you, I think it was in Munson recently. I was with our friend Rick Bousquet, and I said to Rick said to me, you know, if we were here 10, 20, or actually 30 or 40 years ago, you wouldn't see Yamahas, Suzuki's, Kawasaki's hill climbing. You'd have the Indians. You'd have the Triumphs, the BSAs.
A lot of Harleys.
A lot of
Flathead Harleys.
Absolutely. They had a lot of power. But there's a film that came out in the late 60s, early 70s called On Any Sunday. And it's a racing film. It's all about bike racing. And there's a great segment in there on hill climbing. And it's incredible footage. And we have been able to secure it. We'd like to show that to you folks. And I don't know if you've had a chance to see it. It's kind of interesting.
I saw that film a long time ago.
Yeah, well, this maybe will bring back some memories.
Right.
Let's take a quick look at that On Any Sunday, hill climbing, and we'll be right back.
Let's see what's happening in the rest of the motorcycle world. It's Sunday, and we're about 20 miles from Salt Lake City, Utah. There's a hill there called Widowmaker. It's 600 feet high, and the angle up the face is 89%, roughly 45 degrees. It's the site of the annual Widowmaker Hill Climb. No one's ever made it over the top, and they've been trying for 7 years. Riders come from all over the country to compete in yet another highly specialized form of motorcycle competition. As I said, no one's ever made the top, but they give it a hell of a try. Wherever the bike stops is where the measurement is taken, so they get some bizarre push-off techniques. This guy nearly nailed a couple of spectators and lost 12 feet in the process. That's a whole lot better than losing 387 feet. Some of the bikes have a lot of character. The hill climbers themselves are, safe to say, characters. There was the mortician from Waukegan who thought hyperventilation was the answer. It got him up the hill, 15 feet. The classic guy that day was old Hawkeye Hillbilly. He spent considerable time mentally psyching himself up for the hill. Didn't know whether that was his number plate or a traffic citation. On the hill, old Hawkeye the bouncer turned in a great run. Only about 50 feet short of the top.
I'll
good
tell you,
old days.
That's the good old days. Unbelievable. And
It's still like that today. Not much has changed. Hill climbing is still just as deadly and dangerous as it used to be, and it's nice to see some of those old machines rolling over backwards down the hill. And
exactly.
I'd like to have that Indian today, boy. The handlebars are worth more than my bike.
I know it. It's just those bikes were it. And
hill climbing is a really awesome thing, and it's very difficult. It's more than you'd think, and that's why I mean I saw people do it. It made it look very simple, and it's really not. It's very difficult.
Yeah. On another note. Our program, this program is dedicated to the memory of our friend, Mr. George Samuel Jr., known to many as Mr. BSA. He was a brilliant British motorcycle restorationist, and in death, really, he is a legend. And we're dedicating this show to George tonight. I know that if George was with us, we probably would have done a bit better on the hill climb.
Well, that's very true. George Samuel Jr., alias Mr. BSA, or the BSA man, they called him.
Yeah.
He was a legend in his time. He forgot more about these engines and more about these motorcycles than we know. And sadly, he passed away in October. And
very sudden.
It's
Heart
very
attack.
sudden, and he was a great, great man. He still is a great, great man, and
he is.
He is a legend.
I first met George in 1992. I was at a British motorcycle show. It was the BSA or the Triumph, or the Mass BIA show. And he didn't like the way that I was performing on the motorcycle. I don't know what I was screwing up something. I was popping, wasn't running well, and so he came right over to me. How long you been riding a Triumph? I said, well, 2 weeks. And it was true. I'd only been riding the Triumph for 2 weeks. He says, where's your bike? Where's your bike? Well, it's the black Triumph right over there. Of course, there were 10 black Triumphs in that area. So he goes over, lifts up the seat, takes out the ignition wires from the coils, taking wires out, and I tapped George on the shoulder. I said, excuse me, that's the wrong bike. My bike's over there. But yeah, my 72 TR6, he restored that bike for me. I called him on the phone and I said, look, George, we met at the show and everyone tells me you're the man, you're the specialist, and I need to have this bike rebuilt. It's a real mess. Can you help me out with it? And very supportive. It was never an issue of money with him. It was, what do you want? We can work something out. A real professional, and he did a first-class job. Really did a fantastic job with that bike.
Right, this was his life. It wasn't some sideline that a lot of people do. George Samuel Jr., alias the BSA man, there's a lot of trophies that people have on their shelves, and they say that they're trophies. They won at the show for the shiniest bike or whatever, but they're his trophies. He won those trophies for them because he was impeccable. His quality of work, He was. He would really take his time with a bike. It was very step by step. And I've been a mechanic, sorry to cut you off.
No,
I've
it's
been
okay.
a mechanic for many years,
Yeah.
and if you talk to 10 people about the same mechanic, you're bound to hear some people say, well, I don't like this particular mechanic,
True.
or I don't like this particular fellow. And I'm sure that there's stories out there that say that he did this or he did that, because after 30 years of being in the business,
True.
there's bound to be some people where some feathers were ruffled.
Yeah, you can't satisfy
And
everyone.
I've heard stories
Yeah.
that people weren't so pleased with his work as we were,
Yeah.
but I also am very pleased with his work.
Yeah.
He never let me down.
Yep.
And
Before
also,
we get into that, one second. I just got a nod from the control room. We were fortunate enough to have George on Iron Horses.
Yep.
Back in August of '96, we did a program on choppers, on custom motorcycles.
That's what he did mainly.
Yeah, and George was gracious enough to allow us to grant us an interview, and it really made that show. To date, that's been our most popular Iron Horses program. So I'd like to roll the tape of that interview that he gave us for the Chopper show, and it really does capture the essence of George Samuel, who he was, what he was all about. We'll take a look at that clip, and then we'll come right back.
My name is George Samuel Jr., and I have been involved with motorcycles for about 32 years now. I first fell in love with motorcycles when I was about 8 years old. I had the pleasure of riding on the back of a 1948 or 49 Indian. Fell in love with the sound, fell in love with just being around them, and I said, someday I'm gonna have me one of those. Well, I never got an Indian, but I wound up, my first bike was, believe it or not, a Jap bike. I kept it for about 2 months, and then I bought my first 1965 BSA Thunderbolt. That's a single carb 650. Well, it just didn't run the way I wanted it to, so I kind of like futzed around with it and tinkered with it, and it kind of ran a lot different. And then I started working on friends of mine bike, his bike, and basically his bike was a modified, well, that's what we called them back then, a modified Triumph. Well, he had what is referred to as a hardtail, and I think the word kind of describes what you felt like after you had ridden it for about 20 miles. And the hardtail is basically an offshoot of what the Harley people used to refer to as choppers. Now, Peter and I were discussing this before, and the true chopper, the only bike that falls into that category, is a 36 to 47 Harley Knucklehead. Not the Panhead, not the Shovelhead, not the Duo Glide, but the Knucklehead. Anything else, really, in the eyes of the true chopper purist, is called a modified bike. They have all kinds of ways that you can modify, or let's just say chop up a bike, and many reasons why you do it. One, it looks different, obviously. It's an individual taste. Two, it makes the bike much lighter because you're removing a lot of factory equipment. And three, it says a lot about the individual ideas that people can bring to and share with others. And to have someone say, boy, that's really nice. I'd kind of like you to help me, with some ideas on my bike. And as much as you can try, no two bikes are ever the same. There's always something that is incorporated of your individual personality, whether it's the color, the addition or subtraction of factory parts, or sometimes your own innovative ideas as far as maybe you might have thought of something that no one else has. Your brother-in-law, your cousin might have manufactured something that is totally one of a kind, and you want to share it with others. So you put it on your bike, and you hope people will look at it favorably and say, wow, that's really neat. So, but my job is to take literally basket cases or parts that show up in milk cartons, peach baskets, cardboard boxes, and hopefully be able to reassemble them with 3 words, and 3 words in this order in mind. Safety, above all. That's the most important word that you can incorporate when you're riding a motorcycle. I don't care if it's a Harley Davidson, a Triumph, a Kawasaki. If the bike isn't safe to ride, it's not to be put on the road. So safety first, performance next, and looks third. The bike here to my left, it's a 1967 BSA Lightning. It's been completely modified, as you can see. It has what they call a high tunnel peanut tank. It has the frame extensively molded, a king and queen seat. By that I mean we try to have our passengers as comfortable and as safe as we would want ourselves to be, whether we're riding alone or with someone we love. And for that reason, I recommended that not only did they reinforce the rear part of the bike, but they put what they call a support bar. I don't like to use the word sissy bar, I don't like to use the word crash bar, because to me it's a support bar for your passenger, for comfort. The rear wheel is what they refer to as a hog tire. This is to get more rubber on the road, because when you're dealing with a modified bike, you really shouldn't put the stock wheel back on. But this in turn lowers the bike, gives you better handling. This lowers the center of gravity, which makes it easier to manipulate, especially when you've been driving through city traffic for a while. And most important, it allows a different look to the bike, because every bike, regardless of the way it looks or sounds, has its own individual particular identity. And when someone hears something or sees something, you would like them to say, wow, look at that, and maybe nudge the person that they're with saying, isn't that something? You don't see that every day. Or, gee, I've never seen one of those before.
Wow, you know, that says it all right there. You know,
yeah, it's
that's
a great
him,
tragic
the stuff
loss.
that he did.
The British motorcycling community has been dealt a fatal blow with the loss of George Samuel Jr.
It's a real blow. And I hate to sound cruel, but my thought was, you know, why George? Of all the people in the hobby, why him? Because he really was a saint of a man. He was just the nicest guy around.
When I met him,
for you.
he knew you first. He didn't even know me. And I was buying one of those Boyer ignition boxes, which is it's a modern piece of electronics for an old bike. And it's very expensive. It's $100. And I said to him, oh, geez, I don't have the money. And he said, I know, who you? You're friends of Peter's? Just take it. Just take it and get back to me. And don't you know, I sent him a check. And, you know, you don't step on a toe like that. That was a great, great gesture. He didn't know me from anybody. And he took a big gamble on me. I could have walked away and he would have never saw me again.
That's right. And he used to always say that we're all in this together. It's not about money, it's about the love for the motorcycle. We all have this love affair with, in our case, it's the English motorcycles, and the dealer support is pretty much gone. We do have some great people out there like Don Hutch in Wakefield. But
Gate City Cycles
in
Nashua, and there's a few hanging on, but in the old days...
But really, we rely on each other for parts and for assistance. Now, what exactly did he do for you? I know he restored my 72 TR6. That's common knowledge.
Well, the most important thing is the motorcycle on the opening credits of the show, the red BSA of mine, has a George Samuel built BSA engine in it. I put 25,000 carefree miles and hard miles on that bike, and it still runs to this day. Actually, that motor still is one of my, I have a number of motors, and that's one of my strongest ones. That might go right in the ice racer.
25,000 miles
carefree.
On a 69 BSA.
1969, built by George Samuel Jr. back in 1995.
And that is the bike that you see in the opening title sequence of Iron Horses.
You can hear it.
When you hear that rumble of the motor, that kick that Johnny does in the opening titles, that is the BSA.
Yeah, it's too bad. And he did a lot of other things for me, a lot of small stuff. Like I said, he's forgotten more about these things than we know.
And you know, before you get into that, I just want to, I'm going to forget this, but the point to know about George is that his shop was out of his house. He never worked formally for any type of shop. I think Triumph of Wellesley.
No, he did in the old days.
I don't
Way
think
back.
so. He did hang out at Triumph of Wellesley, but he was not a staff mechanic there. He learned things on his own as he went along. He was a postal worker, and he did this on his off hours.
And it was from Medway, was it? Or
Yes, he
Medfield?
reigned out of Medway. And
one of the things he showed me is on these engines, you have to set up what they call the preload of the crankshaft. The engines bolt together, and there's a certain amount of preload. You measure it with a measuring device. And he said, in the book it says it's 3/1000ths of an inch, which is about the thickness of a hair.
Yeah, which is not.
Which I don't have any.
Yeah.
But he said, don't set it up for 3/1000ths, because when you bolt all the other stuff onto it, it pulls on it and it has 6.
Yeah.
He said, set it up for 0/1000ths, and then when you bolt all the accessories to it, it has the 3 that you need. That's the type of stuff that is gone because he is gone.
30
the little
years of
stuff,
knowledge. 30 years
the
of
little
knowledge.
things, those are the things. You know, anyone will read the book and they'll set it up with 3/1000ths of an inch backlash, and it will be wrong.
Well, that's the thing. When you're in the field performing on these bikes and putting the wear and tear on them year after year, you have this knowledge instilled in you, and because he was so active in it for over 30 years.
Right,
you know,
right.
and
And I've known him for 10 years, and it's a great, great loss. And he's also affectionately known as Papa, where he's from.
Oh, really?
He has many children and grandchildren and a loving wife, and they're all great people. And unfortunately, we had to meet them all in October.
Yeah.
But
Oh, he had a lot of friends.
he's
Yeah.
affectionately known as Papa in his circles.
I didn't realize that.
And yes, many grandchildren, and he's a wonderful, wonderful man still to
Yeah.
this day.
And apparently he's got a lot of people helping out, close out the shop. I know Herb Connors, who wanted to be here today. Herb couldn't make it. He got a call this morning from him, last minute cancellation. But Herb is helping cancel out the accounts, the deals, because he had 5 different bikes he was working on. And Herb is helping out with the books.
Making sure that the people get their bikes back, because
Exactly.
he had things that were half built, he had things that were being worked on, and in process things, and I'm actually trying to help some of those people get their machines
Yeah, and
back.
I'll tell you, it's great that you're helping out. It's certainly great. A thank you to Herb Connors for helping the Samuel family, so that he's really kind of putting a barrier up so they don't have to deal with this. He's dealing with the customers. He's got the books. He's got the parts. He's going through it all, and he's just
Yes, there's
helped
good
clearing
people
out the shop
involved
for them. You know?
helping them out, and it is a tragedy to see the shop get cleaned out. And
Definitely.
I spoke to his son to try and continue on, and what he's going to do is he's going to take his blue chopper that
I
you
remember
see
that
in the
chopper.
show. It's in
Yeah.
the show.
It was actually, I believe it was in that clip that we just showed.
His
Sure.
son is going to ride that bike. And also, a lot of people don't know that he did high-performance Volkswagens also as a hobby.
I didn't know
Dune
that.
buggies and really, really hot Volkswagens. He would do them all up and make them really screaming. So
Wow.
his other son is going to take care of his dune buggy duty. So they're going to. He will live forever.
He will. He is a legend. In death, he is a legend. He really is.
Yes, he is. And out of all the fine people that I know, and this poor
Yeah.
guy's got to go. I'm sure that we could have
stinks.
picked someone else if we had a hat to
I know
pick out
a
of.
few dozen I could have picked.
So it's a shame, really. But hey, that's
Well,
the way life
you know,
is.
I'll tell you, it was good seeing you again, Johnny.
Right, Petey.
And,
thanks for coming out of
problem.
retirement to honor George Samuel Jr.
No
because
problem.
He's certainly
Anytime.
worth of it.
And hopefully we'll see everyone again very soon. Wish everyone a pleasant day, happy riding, and we'll see you on the road next time on Iron Horses.